So I'm really thankful today. I have with me Krista Copeland, who I have known since, 98 we were talking about today when she started working at Toko Moose Creek and I was working for Gilbert Smith. So we go back a long way. And today we're standing on a block that Krista has a fertilizer trial on. Some of it was control, some of it had fertilizer on it. And we're just taking a look we're in year 12 right now. We're just taking a look at some of the results. So Krista, first and foremost, can you tell us a little bit about the background of the site and what kind of an ecosystem that we're in?
So this is the ESSF DC1, it's O1 site. It's a pine area. We're sort of high elevation. We're about 1,600 meters, but we're in a primarily pine area. This area is known for its snow loading, and the pine plantations have a notoriously hard time establishing here because of that. And way back in 2012, we had access to some trial funding, and so I decided to give fertilizer a try because we hadn't really used it, and so I picked a whole bunch of blocks that were, I probably wouldn't pick them today, but they were sort of similar blocks in a similar area so that you could maybe compare between the blocks and that. And then I selected a whole variety of fertilizer to put in all of these blocks. So 2 different companies, and I don't know, there was 3 or 4 or 5 different types of fertilizer that I put in these blocks to see. Every fertilizer has a different price and things like that, and the composition is slightly different, and so they were all Teabag fertilizers. And so I can't remember how many blocks there was. I don't know. There's about 12 or 15 blocks.
It's pretty significant.
And it was a lot of hectares that were sort of part of this greater trial. We went and put. Most all blocks have at least two different fertilizers and a control, and a few blocks have like 8 or 9 and a control. So, that's kind of the history.
Yeah. So, was there anything in particular that was just mainly for snow damage potential up here that you were wanting to just give your trees a little bit of a boost, or was it just plain?
I think it was a
like,
wild
what is
guess.
fertilizer going to do?
I think I was like, what's fertilizer going to do? And look, I have all these blocks that are kind of similar. Let's just put it there, rather than take this block here and this block way over there, and then you can't really cross compare them very well because they're in maybe slightly different drainages, or slightly different becks, or slightly different. And so I had this sort of big area here, and I'm like, oh, well, let's just, it's sort of all similar. It's all ESSF DC1. Let's give that a go.
Right. So, I mean, you haven't been out here since when? What year was the last year that you were back?
Last time I was here, well, the trees were probably about this tall when I was here last. So, I don't know. 8 or 9 years ago, maybe.
Yeah. Okay, so it's been a while. So they were just babies compared to what they are now.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, before coming here, what were your expectations of what you might see and what you actually did see? What are your thoughts? Any surprises? Any?
I don't know what I was expecting to see. Like on this trip out, I was obviously expecting to see slightly bigger trees than the last time. Having a look, just having a look back at the photos to, when I was last on site to today, it's really remarkable that, these are now like big trees. Like some of them are like super tall, and they've got great diameter, and I wasn't expecting, I don't know that I was expecting to see that. I guess like
the response of the diameter and the size of the trees from the fertilizing.
We all know that the better established they get, the younger the age, the better that they grow. And but they grow so slowly when they're young.
Yeah.
And so it's in that sort of, you know, depending on where you are, that, you know, 5 to 7, or that, you know, where they really start to, you know, leave from just being little, you know, trees to becoming, you know, the big trees. And so, you know, it was, you know, a little surprising to, you know, I guess it was a little surprising to see just, you know, it's like the starting of a forest. You know?
Yeah. Happening in a short period of time on a high elevation site like this.
Yep.
So these trees are beyond what you would normally expect to see.
They are, yeah.
Because we're standing in
Yep.
front of, this is all Gilbert Smith fertilized at the time of planting, Gilbert Smith pack trees. So
Yeah.
that's good to hear. I certainly, I have a little bit of an advantage over you because the last time I was here was 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And I had done the 5-year measurements, and from my trials, some of them which are now 20 years old, I can see the pattern, and this is exhibiting the same thing. Just like you said, everything starts slow at the beginning, and maybe it doesn't look like much because they're wanting to go more sideways than they are up.
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of discount it when, you know, you plant it, you give it all, you know, the TLC at the start, and then, you know, the first, you know, 3 years, 5 years, you're kind of like, did I do the right thing? Mm-hmm. And then you forget about it because you got all these other, you know, things on your desk to do. Yeah. And then you come back and you go, oh well, look, it's a, you know, it's a big full stand that, you know, normally would probably be, you know, in the, you know, in this height sort of, you know. You know, and it's not.
It's not. That's good to hear. So anyways, that was what I was hoping to see.
Sorry.
I mean, the other thing, I cheated a little bit, I guess. I looked on Google Earth to see what this latest satellite photo looked like. You can definitely see a line, which is, you know, 11 years after planting.
There are some, yeah, and there's some remarkable trees here from the fertilizer that you would never get on this, rarely get on this site in without fertilizing, and the spruce trees really, I think, really hit the jackpot with that.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about, was if there was a species difference or one species that you thought really benefited from it in a...
I think the spruce, I think, and, you know, and I guess I expected, you know, every tree to respond exactly the same, you know, not in reality, but just kind of theoretically, you know, but the spruce really have performed, you know, well. You know, the snowpress hasn't impacted them. Their growth is just phenomenal.
Some of them are like keeping up.
Yeah.
I mean, not the biggest pine, but you know, there's standard average pine. There's spruce trees that are keeping up, and in the control, they weren't even close.
No,
they're not even in the.
They weren't. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of interesting because there's been other sites where spruce has been kind of the marginal, especially your sort of droughty areas. Yeah. That's a really big one because it's for establishment for spruce. It wants water.
Yeah. Yeah.
But getting the roots out, and if you can give it that nutrition at the bump, I've seen consistently spruce performing well on sites you wouldn't expect it to perform.
Yeah, I was, you know, walking here sort of after planting, and looking at, you know, at the block and looking at how dry it is and how, you know, sort of dead, you know, looking, you know, so many of the trees were because of the heat, to now, you know, if, you know, I don't know if I would have expected it or not. You know, I panicked, you know, a little bit at the start, you know, when we walked, because there was a lot of red, you know, a lot of the trees were, you know...
the control trees.
Yeah, yeah. And so, you know, is that going to impact everything? But, you know, the spruce particularly have done really well. Pine really well too.
Yeah, no, it's just like, but we wouldn't expect it, like if anything like spruce, you would just expect you kind of fill it in for some variety, I guess, or to, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
add something to your species mix, but pine would be your go-to tree.
love the fertilizer response, like, hands down. But sometimes on a big operational program, you got to pick and choose. And so, you'd have to weigh cost, sort of the cost benefits of it. Planting, way higher density, or, fertilizing. I still think in some of the fertilizer ground here, the naturals are boosting a little bit of the hard hit snowpress areas. So without the naturals across the block, free growing still might be a little bit challenging. But, that being said, the response on some of these trees is unbelievable for the area, for the,
right, for you're talking about for the neighborhood that we're
for the neighborhood that we're in. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. So I know it's a different.
Yeah.
I mean, you always have to take that into account. The obligations are released at free growing.
Yes. Yeah.
So if they're released at free growing, then you're going to be planning accordingly to that.
Yep.
It's a much different scenario than if you're trying to.
Yes. Yeah.
Gain volume. Now, if you were trying to increase your volume.
See, that's very different. 100% fertilizer all the way. There's, I think, you come back in another 5 years. I think it's even, the differences are even going to be, way more profound than, right now it's a lot of gut feeling, but my guess is if you do the measurements, it's gonna, it's gonna be fully backed up, because you can walk through and, the tree heights you may not see it, but the Gilbert Smith ones are way more robust. They're way,
the stem diameter.
The stem diameter,
it's night and day.
It's a gut, it's a gut feeling, but I believe that if you did measurements, it would totally back that up. And so if my objective was, diameter, 100%, fertilizer is basically the main way to go. Yeah.
Right. So really it comes down to what your objective is.
100%.
So it's not so much a matter of the fact that you don't think fertilizer, you wouldn't do it because it's not benefiting the tree.
Exactly.
It's cost benefit for the operation of the framework that you happen to be working in.
Yeah.
And so, of course, you're not going to get this stand back necessarily. So
it's a hard.
You're going to do what you're obligated to do and nothing more.
Yeah, it's a hard push. It's a hard sell to spend a lot of money up front for when free growing is your only obligation, and the stand can get there on its own.
Right.
It's not right, or whether it's right or wrong, it's legal. It's currently the legislation, and that's what you need to meet. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. My preference with a limited budget, for fertilizer, is to target it in the risk areas, the areas that are going to cost me way more money down the road to try and fix than if I just put the money there up front with fertilizer. So
right.
Yeah.
What would you consider your risk areas?
My risk areas I would consider are areas that I can't access down the road, so that maybe the road's been rehabbed and it's a long hike or a heli to get into. Brush, potential brush areas would be another risk factor. Drought, or some drought areas, to try and get the tree established so that it can overcome potential droughts. Also some interface areas to get the trees growing in some of the community interface areas.
Green up a bit faster.
Green up a little bit faster, a little bit more quicker for some visuals. So those are probably my top choice risk areas.
And when you're saying brush, you're talking herbaceous, or you're talking brush
I'm talking a
your
bit
deciduous shrubs like
well,
yellow and aspen?
I'm talking a bit of both. So I'm talking sort of anything that's going to impact the tree in that 0 to 7, 0 to 5, 0 to 7 age group.
Right.
The more the deciduous that you're going to potentially treat closer to free growing, that's that's a slightly different situation. But if you can get your, with fertilizer and with tree establishment, it's all about tree establishment.
Right.
So, if you can get your trees in the ground and growing really well, within, the first 1 to 3, the rest of its lifespan is so much easier to manage and costs you, way less. And so that's where my focus is. And so sometimes that is, sort of the fireweeds or the, just some of the thicker herbaceous brush. And sometimes that might be some of our higher elevation, with, some of the thicker rhodos or things like that.
Yep.
That might be a consideration.
Good spot, yeah.
Consideration up there as well. Yeah.
What about, I'm just thinking, do you also anticipate like things like aspen that are coming in years 7 to 9 and then fertilizing at the time of planting in anticipation of the trees being big enough to handle that when
if
that
I
pressure
know,
finally comes?
Yeah, if I know that the block next to it has had high deciduous, competition component, then that might be a block that I might consider fertilizing up front, so that by the time it gets to the free growing, and even with the deciduous coming in, the trees are already well established. And yeah, I might have to do some brushing, but it's not going to be all that significant. The trees are fully established. It might be more sort of administrative in that sense, and hopefully we can get some legislative changes for stuff like that.
Right.
But it's gonna, if I can get the trees established, then every treatment past that is gonna be less costly for me.
Right.
Yeah.
And more effective.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that's a good point. Really it comes down to the pivotal moment is the time of planting.
100%. Yeah.
If you get that right, then everything becomes easier down the road.
Yep. Yeah.
And you could anticipate cost savings.
Yep. Timing window of establishment is really crucial. The longer you wait after harvest, the harder it is. For establishment, the less you do can create some issues. This was a plant as is, so luckily it's worked quite well, but that's not always the case everywhere.
No, it's certainly not. So I think about things like herbicides being taken away as a tool now, and even labor, the cost of labor and finding labor access, like you were saying, for brushing that might need to be done 10 years down the road.
Yep.
Trying to anticipate some of those things up front, setting up your trees
can be huge. Herbicides aren't really an option. I haven't used herbicides for 10 plus years at least. The brushing program has significantly, when I was looking after it, it's significantly reduced in hectares to, barely any hectares kind of thing. A big factor in that is, establishment planting, right after doing the site prep in the sort of risk areas to knock the brush back, and fertilizing for those risk areas to try and negate any brushing down the road.
coming.
Yep.
So I'm just curious, there is that one block that was just down the road that still needed to be replanted. So what is the cost of a replant? What is the cost of a fill plant?
They are expensive. And
So I guess I could put forward the argument, what is the cost of even doing one fill plant, replant versus
if the fertilizer can, if you can get the establishment with the fertilizer in a risk area, it's going to be way less expensive over the longer term than if you have to go back and replant and or brush. you know, fertilizer isn't cheap, planting the fertilizer isn't cheap, but it is you're gonna get a better payback, you know, over the time.
Longer period.
Yeah, if you do have to go back for new plants. Yeah.
So it really comes down to risk.
There's it's all risk.
And how you want to manage it.
And how you want to manage it.
So it's interesting that you mentioned drought, and the site that we're on right now, when the first year after planting, when you and I came out in the fall to check it, and that was 11 years ago, we definitely noticed the control trees. There was a lot of red needles on those control trees versus the fertilized trees were fine.
Yeah.
They were all dark green in color.
Yep.
So I do know that one thing that's important is, in order to get the benefit of fertilizer on drought-prone sites, is having the right microsites available, and they have to come lots of times through proper site prep.
Yep.
What's your thoughts on that?
I agree. You know, site prep, I love site prep. It really promotes excellent microsites. Operationally, with funding, it's not always available, and so again, you have to pick and choose your risk sites a little bit. But really, timing window is more important.
Mm-hmm.
You know, planting a block as soon as you can after harvest versus sort of even maybe letting it sit, and you know, even with site prep, or you know, if it sits too long, you're still a little bit behind. And so site prep creates great microsites, and it's a great tool to use. But timing and window is really important. Right. Same with, you know, when you're planting your fertilizer. If you're not hitting the window, you're not getting the benefit of, you know, of what it can offer you, and so you need to sort of really think about, you know,
to nail that down. Yeah. So what would you consider your window, like ultimately, if you're going to fertilize at the time of planting? When would that be?
Basically, for sort of my operating area, it would be pretty much 2 weeks within 2 weeks of snow melt. Ideally with the odd snow patch on the block.
Right.
You know, once you get you know, sort of 3 weeks plus into your program, usually it's weather, you can't really depend on it, but usually the weather gets too hot, and you don't get the benefit, and you know, you come back and you spent all this money, and you don't see the results.
Right.
So,
trees haven't had enough time to establish before the big summer drought hits.
So when I set up my program, my priority blocks are my fertilizer blocks, and you know, the planting contractor, you know, we've had that discussion and they understand that, and when they become available, that's the priority. So you know, some of them might be high elevation blocks, so if they're planting low elevation and this block comes available, you know, we'll put a crew on it right away to get that done, and then we'll go back to the other blocks to finish those ones off.
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion, because soil moisture is really key.
Huge.
If you don't have soil moisture, the fertilizer's not going in the tree, and the tree's not growing.
Yep.
So hitting that timing.
The timing window is critical.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and make a big difference.
Yeah.
If you're not seeing the results of your fertilizer, that's something you definitely want to check.
I would, yeah.
Whether your timing window's right or not.
Come look at my 2 blocks that I planted side by side, and you know, see the
Yeah, it was pretty obvious when we went and checked some blocks that spring. Now, coming back to this block and drought again, we were talking about species mix.
Yeah.
With spruce and pine.
Yeah.
Like, knowing how the spruce responds to the fertilizer, now the Gilbert Smith packs, would you do anything different with your species mix to try and mitigate some of the snow damage that we're seeing?
Yeah, so with this block was a pine block, ESSF, but it was a pine block, and the concern at the time was drought. Even though it's ESSF, the summers are hot, and you know, we have had some drought issues on some of the blocks. And so the concern at the time was spruce isn't really drought friendly. You know, coming back, but we also knew at the time that this is a snow press area. It's heavy issues with snowpress, and pine is really the least preferred species to handle that up here. But given those are our two preferred species, it was a tough, bit of a tough call. Was it the right call? Probably not. If I could go back in time, and see what I did, I probably would increase the spruce, fertilize it, and not fertilize the pine. To manage my costs and to get some of the biggest benefit. The spruce are doing really. Some of the pine are outstanding, but I think to sort of mitigate the snowpress and everything, the spruce are just they're doing really well with the Gilbert-Smith.
So it's really a matter of it gives you another opportunity though to change your species mix up and maybe mitigate the risk a little bit to do that. Whereas before, when we look at the control spruce, it's so far behind the pine.
It is, and that's to be expected for the area.
Right.
It is. I know in your measurements you're showing over the years the difference, but it's really apparent now. The difference, particularly in the spruce. You don't need to measure those. You can just
you can just walk right up and tell.
There's a big difference. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think those are all the questions that I can think of for right now. But what I'm hearing from this, to choose to fertilize, first and foremost, you're seeing the benefit of the fertilizer. Diameter in the pine and definitely all around in the spruce. Dramatic.
Yeah.
Secondly, it comes down to cost benefit.
Yeah.
If you were to get the volume return and you knew that you were coming back to the stand and you were going to harvest one day, fertilize.
Totally. Yeah.
But when you're giving away stands and you're releasing yourself or getting relieved of obligations at the free growing time, it definitely changes how you're going to manage your risks and your costs. And there'll probably be enough, thanks to the naturals coming in, because they certainly weren't seeing it in the damage that with the planted trees, that you'll get your minimum stocking standard and be able to relieve yourself without doing it. And same with choosing other sites, whether it be for brush or for drought or access or whatever it is. That's where you'd be making your target. But definitely, if you get your timing window right, you get the microsite right, you're seeing the benefit.
You're going to see a huge benefit. It's going to be a night and day difference, I think, in your stand.
And that's the key. So it's really up to you how you want to manage your stands and how you want to manage your sites. But it is a tool that does work, and it can work really well for you. It really comes down to your objectives. How you want to manage it and whether you feel that you're going to get the benefit from using it.